here's a short, let's introduce Mr. Deepak Dalal here with a short bio. Uh, Mr. Deepak Dalal chucked up a career as a chemical engineer to write stories for children. He lives currently in Pune with his wife, two daughters, and several dogs and cats. He enjoys wildlife, nature, and the outdoors. The Sahyadri Hills of Pune are a short journey from his home. When not at his writing desk, he is either trekking their slopes or cycling their valleys. His books include Vikramaditya Adventure series for older readers and the gorgeously illustrated Feather Tales series for younger readers. All his stories have a strong conservation theme. So, welcome, Mr. Deepak. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Penguin was kind enough to give us a copy of your latest book, Ranthambore Adventures. I hope the members have been reading it. So I'll just get into the questions first. So how we do it is I have a few questions for you, and around 5:30 we'll open up the floor for the participants to ask their questions to you. People, as you know, please get in your questions in the chat box, and I'll take them first come first serve basis. Yeah. So we often get too many questions and not enough time. So we have to go first come first serve basis. Okay, so my first question to you is uh, that we would love to know about your writing journey. You said that you've given up your chemical engineering career to write stories for younger readers. So how did it start, and has it been anything like what you imagined when you started down this path?
Well, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm audible, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, it's been a long journey. When I started off, it all began with books. I loved books as a kid. I read and read and read and read, hardly studied. I remember just reading books continuously. This continued into when I went to college. I became a chemical engineer by default because everybody in my family is a chemical engineer. It was while I was studying engineering in the US, I found myself reading wildlife journals and not engineering journals. And I had no interest at all in engineering. But it was a bit late. I had to complete my engineering, which I did. I came back to India and I worked out here. And while I worked, I traveled a lot during that time. We did a lot of trekking across the Sahyadris where I live. I went to the Himalayas. I went to Lakshadweep Islands, the Andaman Islands, and I saw so much beauty out there. Particularly, I remember one of my first treks in the Sahyadris, passing by Shivaji's forts out here. Such beautiful places, but nobody knows about them. And it struck me at that time that, hey, this area is kind of, nobody's in this, wilderness areas, and setting stories there in those, instead of setting them in cities, in geographically different places like islands, like in the Himalayas, like in our river basins or in our game sanctuaries. There was nobody's really done that, and I thought about it, and I wrote my first story out, Lakshadweep Adventure. Actually, we went on a trip. I enjoy the outdoors. I enjoy the sea, and I love windsurfing. We went on a trip to windsurf between the islands of Lakshadweep. We used to do a lot of windsurfing here in Pune, where I live. And when we got to the Lakshadweep Islands, it was a completely different story where, 300 kilometers out, we had no clue what we were up against with the swell, which rose 20 feet and went down, trying to windsurf between islands. But what happened was during that time, I stayed with the locals. We taught them windsurfing. They took us scuba diving. They took us into their homes. We went fishing with them. I learned so much about the islands. And the islands, what do we know about when we study in school? All we know is that they grow coconuts out there and the industry is fishing. But there is so much more beyond that. I'm talking about scuba diving, the coral reefs, the people, their lives, their fishing. And I thought, let me try and bring that out through a book. And that was my first book, Lakshadweep Adventure. Um, the story might have been a good story, but it was horribly written. I have to admit this. I had no editor at that time. I churned out the story. which I enjoyed doing. And I gave it to Penguin. Penguin had just started. I'm talking about the 1990s. They just started um, publishing children's books, and they took my book. They signed a contract, and later on, 3 years later, they got back to me. That's how long I had to wait. 3 years later, they got back to me and said, "Cut it in half." I couldn't do that, of course. So that's where it ended with Penguin. And then that time there was no HarperCollins. There were none of the other big names out here. So I essentially published it myself. And the only thing that really worked for me, because getting into bookshops and moving them around is a big pain, and I had to do a bit of that. But I went to a few schools, and the schools picked up these books en masse. My book Ranthambore Adventure, my book Lakshadweep Adventure. What they liked was that these stories are set in these kind of places which they want children to know more about. And there's a huge wildlife and conservation angle to these stories. So that's how it all began. And then eventually Westland took over the books, and now Puffin has all the books. And I must say, Puffin gave me the opportunity to rewrite all my books. And this whole craft of writing, as we call it. When I started writing, I had no clue about the craft of writing. I just wrote what came to me, and it was a decent stories, but very ordinarily written, or you could say quite terribly written. And so when I got this opportunity to rewrite all my books, and I in between went and took a course in the U.S. They had invited me there. Actually, they used to take one writer from India, and I was chosen once, and I sat with these editors from Penguin America, and they told me. I mean, I literally learned so much from them. And when I came back, I realized that all my books had to be rewritten, and that's when I did. And now they're all out through Puffin. That's a brief journey about what happened in the publishing thing.
So, when you started, like you said, you wanted to write and you just got started without any background of writing.
Nothing.
Uh, but did you have a goal in mind, or did you imagine that one day you would be known worldwide for your books?
Not known worldwide, but yeah, the books are now reasonably popular, and they sell reasonably well. And nothing like what I would like them to sell, but by Indian standards, they sell reasonably well. And yeah, so I was pretty sure the stories were good, but otherwise, that's why we write them, right? You got to be convinced with your own book. If you're not convinced with your own book, just don't write it, you know. So I was pretty sure that the stories were good. And then when I actually rewrote them and I completely represented them, yeah, I was very happy, and they've been selling well, and it's a good thing now. I mean, now, yes, I'm a reasonably well-known writer. I get called all over India to give talks, and yeah, it's been fun. It's a good journey, and I'm happy where I am. But it's a hard journey. It's not an easy one. When you are writing and nobody wants to read, and you can't get your books into bookshops, I kind of endured that and managed to get these stories out. So
So, the Vikramaditya Adventures, like I'm saying it as Vikramaditya, but it's Vikramaditya Adventure series. They are like our Indian version of Famous Five, right? Often off on
Hardy
their
Boys,
own
they call them.
adventures. Hardy
Yeah, they call
Boys.
them Indian Hardy Boys, but I would say that there's a lot more research that goes into these books. I spend, like, for example, my stories, say, in the Andaman Islands. I made 2 trips over 3 years. I spent close to 3 months out there, traveling from island to island, all the places nobody goes to, did a lot of scuba diving, rented boats. There's a lot of research that goes into these stories. So went to Barren Island, met the Jaroa, who nowadays nobody is allowed to meet. And yeah, so there's a lot of research that goes into these books. And it's the wildlife part is very true. I'm very much a wildlife person. I am part of various wildlife organizations, and I have to say that most of my books, I got so many inputs from people who study wildlife, and I mean they have already been in the area for several years. They know where I should go, what I should do, and they help a lot. And that really, I mean, I owe a lot of my writing due to the inputs which I've received from wildlife researchers in very remote locations.
But can you tell us the origin of the characters? How did it all start?
Vikram and Aditya. Well,
Yes.
you know, it just came about. I didn't really, yeah, okay, I did in a sense that Vikram and Aditya are two complete opposites. Vikram is the guy whom I want to be, actually. I wish I was, who thinks it over, who is in any difficult situation, his brain remains cool and calm, and he's always doing the right things. He's not very strong, but he's very capable, and he's got a great head on his shoulders. Aditya is very different. He's a big, strapping young man, 6 feet up tall, and he jumps in where, without thinking, and does, he just very impulsive character. So these are two very opposite. One's thinking, and the other one impulsive, and together, I mean, I thought that was a good set to get along for my stories, and it has worked as such. The idea is to, have, if you had similar characters that do the same thing, that wouldn't work. This gives you a lot more scope during your writing when you have two very different characters. Can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Uh, the
Yeah.
children can learn a lot about compassion and empathy from the books that they read. So, how important is that for you to include certain themes in each book for the readers to pick up?
So, kids of today live in cities. When they travel to other cities. They rarely go to wildlife areas. Now, if they're going to have to look after the forests, or the next generation when they take over as forest ministers or whatever, if they never, through these books, what I'm trying to do is build a connection between them and wildlife and wilderness areas. Trying to make them develop that compassion, because it's only if they develop that compassion they're going to look after forests. If you live in cities, you don't care what's happening outside. So this endeavor is to create that connection between kids and wilderness areas and wildlife, and I believe stories in a big way, in a very huge way, create that compassion. Um,
Mhm.
so when I write about turtles in my Lakshadweep book, it's very much woven into the story. I write
Mhm.
about coral reefs, or I write about what do you call, snow leopards, or even tigers. Which the tiger story Ranthambore came about because I was way back about 20 years back. We were losing tigers, literally one every day. It was terrible what was happening there, and I had to communicate this to kids. I felt so much about it. I realized, I just wanted them to know what was going on, and that was the origin of that book, which really sent me. And I did a lot of research, and that has turned out to be my biggest bestseller, the Ranthambore book. But compassion is not just for animals, and it's also for humans, in the sense that when I write stories about the Jarawa, they're a disappearing race, and I wanted children to know about them. And they've been treated very badly by us. I don't want to go into the whole story, but there's a lot about the Jarawa, the way the government has treated them, the way they're pretty hopeless their lives are. And they were the ones who owned all these islands before we came and took it away from them. So even that compassion, is it's about wilderness, it's about wildlife, it's also about people. Books are a great vehicle for creating compassion among readers.
Yeah. Talking about your readers, actually, because this FDC has been specially for children's writers and children's books, we have been talking a lot about the gatekeepers of children's book during this 1 month. So, what is your take on them, and do you agree to the categorizing of books for children?
You know, Today kids don't read, and that's a fact. All right, you'd be lucky if say even 10% of a class reads. Uh, the only time to get them into reading is when they're young, because when they cross into eighth standard and above, it's over because studies takes over. So it's during that period, the golden period or whatever you want to call it, you have to connect them with books. Now, who connects them with books? Um, it's either school with their teachers and librarians, or it's the parents. Now, more often than not, parents, they have busy jobs. They come back home, they put on the television, and they don't really read that much nowadays. So the whole thing falls on librarians and teachers. And schools can make a huge difference, a huge difference. Unfortunately, the librarian post in schools is not given to a person who loves books. More often than not, the librarian post is given to a teacher who can't be fitted anywhere else, so they put him or her in the library. And that they have no clue which are the good books and which are the ordinary books and what children should read or how to get children to read. They just have no clue. So I would say the majority of schools are stuck with librarians with there like this, but a small percentage, and they really have good librarians. It's a very small percentage, and they really want to push reading, and it's their kids who actually read. So yes, I think schools play a big role. Um, Parents, unfortunately, are not playing their part. Children have children have far too many distractions, and to make them give up what they're doing and read books, it's a tall order. It's difficult. It's not impossible, but you need the help of schools. You need the help of peers who read. And yeah, and about categorization of books. So what happens is the the audience we want to read our books, which are basically English speaking schools, middle class to up schools, which cater good English. They teach good English in their schools. Those kids don't want to read our books. They want to read Percy Jackson. They want to read Harry Potter. They want to read all those in Artemis Fowl and all the great titles. They're fabulous books available. It's hard to get them to pick up. If you look at, uh, I've been often asked to judge what you call children's writing competitions, and every little essay or story they write, which you read, has got a John or a James or a Lucy there are no Indian names. That shows clearly that their preference is international books. They don't. They very rarely read our books. It's a hard climb. Adult writing, Indian adult writing, after Arundhati Roy, Salman Rushdie, they've established a great platform across the world, and these books are read. We are nowhere near that in children's books. We need a lot more writers. We need good writers to establish a similar kind of platform out here, which will make children pick up our books. At this point, it's very hard. It's an uphill task. It's not that it won't happen, and it's not that it's not happening. It's happening, but it's an uphill task to get them to read our books. And even within our books, Ruskin Bond or Sudha Murthy, no, they don't go much further than that. It's difficult to get them. It's happening slowly with my books. It's happening slowly with my friends' books. But as I said, it's an uphill task.
Yeah, like Percy Jackson and all, Greek mythology seems to be more attractive than Indian mythology to our kids. I don't know why.
It's just the way it is. You must remember those books are brought out beautifully. Our covers, considering the costs, the printing, and you can't in India you can't get a high price with your books. So and the print runs are not high. So we don't our books don't compare. Everybody, you say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but everybody judges books by their covers, and our covers are pretty ordinary compared to those, and we just cannot change that because there's no money for that. So it's not an easy one. So what really helped for me in particular is that I sell several thousand books, many, many, many thousands as readers. And that's just been very lucky that because the kind of writing I do, which is set in these wilderness areas, and it's a lot of conservation and wildlife. And so I don't know, for some reason, schools are picking up my books. That's the only way I can compete with that, But it's not an easy one.
So I have one last question before we get into participant questions. From my end, I would like to ask you, like, what is the one thing in your opinion that children's writers should keep in mind while they write?
Well, never talk down to kids. They hate it. Don't lecture them. We all have a message to send in our stories. But if they sniff out the message and know that it's a message, they're never going to read your book. You got to bury it deep. I mean, we all have a message in our writing. You got to bury it so deep that they have no clue that you're passing on a message to them. You're not that you're talking down to them or that you're sending them in a certain direction. So so don't talk down to kids and treat them as adults, because actually, when they're reading like adults. So don't. I think that's what it is. don't talk down to kids. Just treat them as equals, and yeah, try and get through to them out there. All messages buried deep.
Okay. So the first question from audience is Arun is asking, what is the inspiration to write the feather tales that are different from your adventure tales around geography?
So the Feathertail series was all about I love birds. There are 10,000 bird species worldwide, 1,000 plus in India. And what do kids know? All they know is crows, pigeons, sparrows. Not even sparrows; they're not there much anymore. But miners, maybe the odd bulbul, kites. But we have 1,000 species in India, from cranes to ibises to hornbills to orioles. I mean, it's a huge wealth of bird life, and kids are absolutely unaware of this. And so I thought, if I wrote a series which had birds as characters, and not and very beautifully illustrated, because you want the illustrations to come out in a way that the kids recognize the birds that you're writing about. Okay, that's a crane, and it sticks in their head that these are cranes. And the whole thing was to just create make them see birds in a different light by making birds as making the characters, and hopefully creating that bond. And the big step is making them bird watchers also. It take nature through birds. That's what it was. And I think birds are a wonderful medium, because you can imagine the adventure the birds live. They migrate from one end, like the Arctic turns from the North Pole to the South Pole. The Amur falcon flies from China through India, across the Indian Ocean into South Africa. There's so much adventure out there, and so birds provide. Sitting in India, I can write a story in the Arctic, or or the birds which live in Africa. It's an amazing platform for setting stories and connecting kids with birds. That was the main thing, was connecting kids with birds and using the adventures they have to to communicate with them, and hopefully create that bond which I like to create with them and wildlife and bird watchers if possible.
Okay. Arun's second question, you have already covered. Earlier versions of your books are with different covers. Is there any reason why the books are republished with different covers? I think you've
But
already covered that.
yeah, but well, Penguin wanted first, when I did it myself, I did change the covers along the way. Then Westland wanted new covers. Then Penguin wanted new covers. I mean, it just happened. Yeah, there have been several permutations and iterations of covers on these books. I hope you like the current covers. Though I have to
They're
say,
really good.
there are two books, the Sahyadri books, we got messed up. I won't go into the reasons for it, but in my opinion, they're the best books I've written, but they got the worst covers possible. So, but that's
Okay.
publishing. Sometimes you get stuck.
Okay. So Sunil asks, what are your recommendations for creating immersive characters? Secondly, can you share some tips from the American Penguin editors that helped you hone your craft?
Well, yeah, that was the American program I went for. It was really, really wonderful in the sense that it taught me a lot. You had to, there was a magazine, which is, I'm sorry, I don't have the name right of it, but uh, it's an American magazine which is published across schools and across America. A very popular magazine. And they, at one time, used to take one person from India. At that time, you had to submit your an unpublished manuscript to them. And based on that unpublished manuscript, they chose one person from India every year. So I got chosen way back in 2003. And I went there. And before you went there, you had to submit a chapter from your book, or a couple of chapters from your book. So that the editor would have read it and they could give you feedback on that. And I must say, I met this lady, Patricia. She just took my story apart. I thought it was the best thing I'd written. She just took it apart and said, Deepak, there's not the way to do this, there's not the way to do that. Here's your homework. Take it and give it to me tomorrow completely rewritten. And I had these classes going on, plus I had to rewrite this, and I had to use my head and do it correctly. It was, she was quite a taskmaster, but she taught me so much. And one of the things I can say, which I learned from her, is there is so much great writing available. I mean, from Artemis Fowl books to, I mean, the genres in children's writing. I, in particular, write adventure books, so I read. I mean, some of the best craft and writing is available for you out there. All you have to do is pick up these books. Like there's this lady called Sharon Creech, a book with two moons. There's similar like whole list of these books. Uh, it is mind blowing the way she's created these characters, the backstories to each of these characters, and the way the story moves back and forth. And it's you learn so much by reading other books, and that's what this lady Patricia taught me also. Just read, and don't read it as a story only. Read it in a way that you see how each chapter is developed, how each paragraph takes it forward, how each statement and the characters, how they're handled, the change of the characters through the books, how they become different and how they eventually become heroes. You learn so much, and it just completely turned my thought. I mean, this whole thing of craft of writing, I didn't even know that this craft of writing stuff existed. And she said, Deepak, this is the way to do it. And if you want to be published, you have to change your ways. I mean, all my books have been selling so well in school that I felt that I was a writer that arrived. But then suddenly I realized a writer was nowhere. And I rewrote all my books. And and so that really helped a lot. These experiences, it's a place called Chautauqua in New York. The name of the magazine, it's just not there at the moment in my head, but I could share it some other time if anybody's interested. But they were the ones in those days which held this annual children's writers program at Chautauqua in New York State, Upper New York. It was beautiful and it helped me a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so next question is, why would you choose to write for children?
I think children are a very receptive lot. Somehow, I guess I've not really grown up. I empathize with kids a lot. I try and see the world through their eyes whenever with them, without trying to look it through my version of it. And I try to come not down to the level or up, whatever way you will look at it, but I try and, they appeal to me in the way they think, the freshness of their thought. And it's the only time, it's before they turn, adolescence comes around early nowadays. But I would say around 7th standard, till that time you can really mold their minds. And it's a very important thing to mold their minds in the correct direction. And if you write the kind of books, through these books, try and mold their minds into doing, to loving nature, loving the outdoors, whatever you want to convey through your books. I think the best time is before 7th or 8th standard. And I think you can achieve a lot more with kids at that age than with adults. So that's probably the reason. But I have to say, a lot of adults read my books, which is a very satisfying thing. And because in a sense, once they cross 6, 7, you're writing actually for adults and children. It's just that the heroes in this case are children.
Okay. The next one is not really a question. It's a comment, but I just want to read it out. It's from one of our participants called Vivan Bajpai. He's a 13-year-old who's working on his first manuscript dystopian story. So he says, my name is Vivan Bajpai. I'm an avid reader and book blogger. I have read all of the Vikram Aditya books. They are simply amazing. It is a great honor to meet you.
Well, thank you so much, Vivan. Thanks a lot. That's very sweet of you. I'm so glad. We authors feel happy when children like our books. And it's wonderful to hear that feedback. Thank you so much. And keep reading. I don't know about writing dystopian stuff. I don't write that kind of stuff. But keep reading, and I hope you become a writer. The only way you can become a writer is through a lot of good reading. Those who don't read will never be writers. So just keep reading, and you'll get there.
That's it. Thank you so much. And next question is from Krishna Kumar, and if you don't want to answer it, it's okay. Can you share how the financial needs of your life was taken care during writing? Also, did you give up the entire chemical engineering career to write full time, or did you manage it on the side as you worked?
Well, it's a very valid question, actually, because you give up your work and your source of income, and it's a very hard one. Uh, because writing the stories, at least which I write, which require a lot of research and travel, and it's expensive doing all this kind of stuff. Uh, and then you hardly sell any copies to start with, at least. So yeah, financial thing, it is an important factor. You have to various people, they balance it in different ways. Yeah, but you're not going to become a millionaire writing books. Let's put it that way. Unless, I mean, there are very few Harry Potter kind of successes. Uh, you have to cut down on your lifestyle, or you got to find alternative ways of making money. So I used to do both these together. So that's why writing was so slow, also, because sometimes I used to like indulge in work for a period of time, then I'd take time off and write. So yeah, luckily I could get in and get out. You know, so sometimes for a couple of years I didn't write. So the books took a long period of time to come. But now that they're selling, and now that I'm kind of reasonably financially settled, I can write as much as I want. But it's a tough journey. You don't earn much. I mean, really, even if you sell 50,000 copies a year, it's not a big deal if you're getting 20 rupees a copy, or say 25, 30 rupees a copy. It's not like huge sums of money. And it's it's a sacrifice, and very few, and except for Ruskin Bond and Sudha Murthy in India, children's writers haven't really ever really made a good money in writing. It's a bit of a sacrifice for all of us. We sacrifice to, we enjoy it, we do out of enjoyment, and financials come afterwards. So it's good to have an alternate source if you want to be a writer.
Okay. The next question is from Mangesh, who asks, while using Indian mythological elements in our stories or novels, is it necessary to use true locations, names, events, or can we use fantasy, hypothetical names of places? Considering the current scenario, can using real names or real events may create controversies across the country?
Writing does create controversy. So our aim is to minimize that, because it can be turned pretty nasty sometimes. So yeah, you got to be tread very carefully. The point is that I actually don't write mythology, and I haven't followed mythology at all. I write real adventure, in the sense that realistic stuff. So I really can't comment on this beyond a point. But yeah, you could create trouble to your writing. I think it's okay to create a little bit of trouble, in the sense that if you stand for something, then why not? It's all right as long as your publishers accept it. Sometimes they pussyfoot around these things. But you want to take a stand, you want to make a statement. The writer comes to this dilemma. I mean, do you do that or you don't? I think it's good to be bold and take that stand, and push forward what you think, even though it could get you in a little bit of trouble. I think that's the right way forward. I mean, after all, writing is about, you want to communicate to people your thoughts, not just your thoughts, but you want to communicate certain things, and stories are great vehicles for conveying those things. So you shouldn't lose that opportunity.
Okay. So next question is from Sunita, who is saying that I'm writing a memoir now, but I would like to write for children as I know their mindset, having been a music teacher for over 30 years.
Wow.
What advice do you have for wannabe children's book author?
It depends what books you want to write. I mean, do you want to write picture books? Do you want to write chapter books? Or do you write between picture books and chapter books? The idea is, at the end of the day, don't talk down to children. As a teacher, sometimes because we've been teaching, we kind of have a certain attitude to kids that, this has to be done, that has to be done. You got to get that out of your system, because they don't like being talked down to. Really, as I spoke earlier, I mean, every good book has a message, but that message has to be buried deep. So they don't even understand that message has been passed on. Yeah, I guess that's the kind try and see the world through it. I mean, as a teacher, you have this wonderful experience. You're having taught kids for all these years, and that to music. Uh, you come across all kinds of characters. Try and pick some of those characters who are really funny or really different. Because you've really been exposed to so much which we have to invent. You've actually done. You've been with these kids, so you're in a very good position to write good books and something entertaining, something that wants them to keep turning the pages. A little bit of anticipation. You need to bring all these things into your stories. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think you're in a great place to write.
Okay. Sunita has actually left a comment also saying, Mr. Deepak Dalal, we seem to be kindred spirits. I am an eco ambassador and would love to introduce topics of ecology and conservation to children too.
So I would say when you put ecology and conservation, everybody is talking about global warming. Everybody is talking about everything's going wrong in this planet. You have to make you also give hope to children. You can't tell them to give them the gloomiest of futures. You know, we got to paint stories which stay away from too much gloom, too much this. I think you have to be a little more subtle about this. Find subtle methods for conveying these points because most of the writing that comes out today is just like plonking it on them one after the other, writer after writer about this is going wrong with the earth, this is going wrong about loss of forest, loss of this, loss of that. Uh, we're building very negative pictures. We need to also build some hope into it. So you need to have a balance when you write these kind of books.
Okay, great. Next question is from Shreyank, who asks, when writing for young adults, how do you add content to a story without bloating the tale or disturbing it? I'm currently writing a 150-page book and I find it slightly difficult to add meaningful plot lines in the story.
So one thing about writing is that we try and convey a lot through very little words. You know, if your story is bloating, with you need to sit back and you know. When I wrote my first book, I always thought in several of my books, I used to always think that hey, it's done finally. Actually speaking, this is what I learned in Chautauqua in the U.S. Your first draft is just the beginning of your work. You got to keep going through the story with a comb, not once, not twice, but 10, 15 times. Read it over and over and again and keep cutting, 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 cutting to convey as much as you can with minimum number of words. So I think you need to uh, look back at your writing. You need to go through very fine detail. And every time you read it, and I've seen this to myself, I cut out so much, and it is very important to convey what you want to convey with a minimum number of words. None of these, sexy adjectives and flowery language. I mean, that's the first thing you need to cut out. But there's a lot more you can cut out. You can keep you look and you read and you read. You'll just see that this can go, that can go. And you'll be surprised. So I think that's what you need to do. Just don't consider that when you've written the book, now it's bloated and it's done. Just keep working at it, and you can bring it down. Have a very positive attitude. Don't get stuck in keep looking at it differently each time you read it, and you'll find ways to cut down.
Okay. So Vivan has dropped in a question. I think you already told him, given him an advice of reading more, but he wants to know what are the tips you would give for a green literature writer.
Well, you need to, like I said, all my uh, inputs to my stories, which are very genuine inputs, came because I associated with wildlife people, with conservationists. I read a lot of the magazines, I travel a lot, I experience wildlife, wilderness areas, and the beauty of nature firsthand. So I think if you want to be a green writer, you need to, at all stages, uh, go out, leave home, understand what's happening, go to these areas, join these wildlife clubs, join these birding clubs. You know, I'm just suggesting that because these are easiest ways to, you meet people who have already a lot of this knowledge. Try and go, like for example, the Andaman Islands. I went there because my friend, who was a scientist and ornithologist, he went there to study a certain bird called the edible nest swiftlet. Okay, it's a very long name, edible nest swiftlet, but basically edible. Well, I won't go into it, but then I went there with him. We protected the caves out there where the people come and slaughter and take their nests away. So these kind of experiences teach you a lot. Uh, Ranthambore, where I story wrote on tigers, I actually walked in the forest. Because when you go to if you go to a nature reserve, generally you got to sit in a jeep, and instead of hearing the quiet of the forest and the sound of the birds and the wind, all you hear is the sound of other jeeps and taka taka tak, and everyone's searching for tigers. It's no fun actually. I mean, it's not helping you to become to be able to write a story on wilderness or on green areas. You have to experience it, and for its immerse yourself in it, and then only you understand. You'll be able to write these kind of things. So my first advice to anybody who writes on the green is go and experience it yourself. Don't pick up stuff from other books and other magazines. Go to these places, experience nature, experience wilderness areas, and then write about them.
Okay. Next question is from Mangesh again. Why doesn't India have its own set of superheroes? Is it that the Indian kids? Is it that the Indian kids and young adults don't like books references to Indian mythology?
Uh, Creating superheroes is actually done more by publishers, in the sense that they work out a theme, they work out what they want, and then they get people to write these stories. It's created the other way around. It's not generally the idea of a man who comes up with something, goes to a publisher and gets it published. It's the other way around. The publisher has a certain goal and creates these superheroes through various writers. In India, we don't have a thriving publishing industry for kids. We haven't yet developed it to that stage. Once it develops to that stage, once we have a lot of writers, a lot of publishers who, for example, Scholastic, when they came out with their Wimpy Kid, or they not Wimpy Kid, but they had this Ghost series or something. But various series are all conceptualized at the publisher level, and then the superheroes are created through that. Uh, that's generally been the process for successful superhero creations, and we're just not in a position to do it at this stage. No publishers got the money to back it. It needs a lot of money to back it, a lot of marketing, a huge amount of marketing that goes into this. Why do you like these superheroes? Because they've been projected in such a way, which you enjoy, and that's done through very expensive marketing around the world, which we just at this point are not yet ready for. Uh, Try. It's not
Okay.
easy. Publishers are not doing it. Oops. Video due to problems with your
Okay.
network. Am I okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Sorry. I
the
got.
next question is
Yeah.
from Krishna Kumar, who's a parent of two kids aged 4 and 5, 5.5 years. He started reading non-academic books only after his graduation. So his question is, how do I make my kids attracted to reading? I get them picture storybooks and read the stories. What other things should I do?
So you get the picture books and don't just read the stories. Go into every page. All the some of these picture books convey so much with every picture that is drawn out there. Go into it, delve deeper into it, make your son the character out there. So he's the character there. How does he speak to you? Just go deep into these stories, because these stories convey a lot, and it's not just reading to them, it's exploring different ideas, going into books from different points of view, and that's all. This also builds a bond between the father and the child, and I've always recommended the best time to get kids reading is at this picture book stage, where they want a story every night, and you are there to deliver it to them, and you pick up this book, and it's more than reading. Go into it. Go into it. As I said earlier, I'm repeating myself here, but you have to spend time with every frame, every picture in the book, every line, because each line in picture books conveys a lot. And there are so many picture books available, so many. So pick them up. Okay, and now you get so many recommendations online, etc. And then once they get hooked onto these stories, it'll be this way. They say, "Dad, I can't go to sleep without you reading this for me." Uh, get them to that level, and once you got them there, you won possibly three-fourths of the battle of making them readers, because at that very young age, you got them into books, and I'm assure you it'll carry on for the rest of their lives. And you can also read the big books, like the Harry Potters. Many parents read it to their kids. It's a wonderful bonding which is created through this.
And I think, as someone who was told a lot of stories as a kid, Krishna Kumar, you should also pay attention to the stories that they keep wanting to hear over and over again. So that will give you an idea of what kind of stories they are really
True,
into,
true.
and maybe try more of those. Okay, so another question is from Timsi. She's asking, I find difficulty creating characters different from people that I have interacted with in real life. Have you faced this difficulty? If so, how do you overcome it?
I think most of us pick up characters born from our own life, whom you've met, whom you've done. A lot of people get inspired by people whom they meet. Uh, you know, you, you can come up with a number of characters, but it also helps to pick up from real life. You need to pick up from both, in the sense from real life. I think it has a lot of spice to it, and the ones whom you imagine and create at the same time. It's a balance of the two. As I said, my Vikram in my Vikramaditya books, I wanted to be like him. I created somebody whom I always wanted to be. Uh, the Aditya in my books was, the exact opposite. So based on that, I created my main characters out there. But yeah, there are all kinds of characters, and I pick up an equal amounts from both real life and from just creating through my imagination. Often the story dictates the character too, in the sense that the story needs to go in this direction, and for that needs a character of this kind, this kind of person in the story. So it's a mix of that also, because the story requires certain characters, and then you pull out characters to fit also out there. So there are various different ways of creating these characters. Just don't worry, it just comes. I use a mix of all of these, and I change characters sometimes in the story if they don't fit also. It's a
Okay.
story, and story is controlled by characters, so all have to fit very well.
Yeah. Actually, I have heard some authors telling in their interviews that, they wanted the character to be in a certain way, but once they started writing and the
Yeah,
plot
yeah,
started
yeah.
driving and the characters had to change. And sometimes
I can
characters
tell
change
you,
the plot.
absolutely. You might think that I'm going from place A to place B and to C. You lose track very soon, because your story just keeps moving in different directions. And that's the way it is. The story is a creature which is doing different things, and you can't hold it on one path. It seeks its own path. And yeah. And your characters often, as you were saying, the characters often change the story. It's a very, there is no certainty as you write. Your characters develop as you write. Your characters change as they write, depending on the story. So it's a little complex subject, but it's finally the story.
Okay. So I think we have come to an end of the questions for today. Okay. Arun has another question for you. I want to
Uh,
know the writing process. Is the entire plot already with you, or do you write as it moves along?
the outline of the plot. I know where the story is going. At least I hope I know where the story is going. And then as you I don't create the entire plot because, as we said, the story goes in different directions. But I know where I want to reach. I know the beginning, the end, and maybe a couple of waypoints in between. And yeah, then the story takes its own directions within that. But I don't have the entire plot in my head. I just have a good idea of what the plot should be, but it's not completely fleshed out. And it really happens as you write. As you write the plot, you go deeper into what you had thought of earlier. And then when you go deeper into this, you realize, oh, this can't happen, or maybe this is a good place to go to. And it's when you're actually fleshing out the story, when you're actually writing the story, that's when the real directions happen and the real things happen. So the plot actually comes out at that time, the depth of the plot, the moment of the plot. At the beginning, in your writing stage, I at least I don't have the entire plot in my head. I have an idea where I'm going, and I know a few waypoints. Nothing more than that. The plot develops as I'm writing completely. Almost the majority of it comes as I'm writing. Because when you're writing, you actually go much deeper into the story than you're just thinking. When you're just thinking and trying to create a plot, it's very different from actually you got the laptop in front of you and you're keying and you're going sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph. That's when you go much deeper into the story. And that's when the real story emerges, the real plot emerges.
So that's amazing to hear. So thank you so much. We would like to thank Penguin, and obviously thank you, Deepak ji, for giving us your time today. We've learned quite a bit. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Okay.